In one of the most elite residential areas of Los Angeles, a young girl named Alan lived with her loving family. Her household consisted of her caring parents, her younger brother Alex, and their intelligent African gray parrot named Arthur. Arthur wasn't just a pet, he was an integral part of their family, known for his sharp intelligence and vibrant personality. African gray parrots are renowned for their exceptional cognitive abilities and mimicry skills, and Arthur was no exception. His feathers were a stunning mix of soft grays and white, with a vivid red tail that added a pop of color to his elegant appearance. Arthur could mimic voices, solve small puzzles, and even recognize basic math patterns. He was not just a bird, he was a remarkable companion. The family lived a peaceful and harmonious life. They often spent evenings together, sharing laughter and stories while Arthur entertained them with his antics. Alan, in particular, had a special bond with Arthur. She spent hours teaching him new words and tricks, and in return, Arthur became her closest friend and confidant. One such moment of their extraordinary connection happened during a school assignment. Alan, struggling with a complex math problem, spoke her frustration aloud. "I just can't figure this out." To her astonishment, Arthur mimicked the numbers and guided her to the correct solution by tapping his beak on the right sequence. Alan's laughter filled the room, marveling at her feathered friend's brilliance. Arthur's unwavering presence brought joy and comfort to the entire family. Whether it was chirping melodious tunes in the mornings or flying around the house to greet everyone, Arthur made sure he was always part of their lives. His attachment to Alan was particularly special. He followed her around the house, perched on her shoulder during her studies, and even slept near her at night. The family's world seemed perfect, with happiness woven into their daily lives. But life, as they would soon discover, had an unpredictable turn waiting for them. Little did they know their loving parrot's extraordinary intelligence and loyalty would soon be put to the ultimate test in the face of an unimaginable disaster. It was a calm Monday night, January 13th, 2025. Inside their home in an elite Los Angeles neighborhood, Alan and her family were sound asleep. The quiet evening, however, was a deceptive prelude to chaos. Unbeknownst to them, a devastating wildfire had erupted in the hills, spreading rapidly and engulfing everything in its path. The fire, fueled by strong winds and dry conditions, swept through the city, turning the night sky into an ominous hue of orange and red. Outside Alan's home, the flames crept closer, consuming trees, cars, and everything in their wake. The usually vibrant neighborhood was now cloaked in thick, suffocating smoke. Arthur, perched on his stand in Alan's room, was also asleep. But suddenly his sharp senses detected a shift in the air. The faint smell of smoke and the warmth of the approaching fire stirred him awake. Alert and aware, Arthur's bright eyes scanned the room, and he quickly realized that danger was near. Outside the window, he could see the glow of flames flickering ominously. Wasting no time, Arthur sprang into action. He let out a series of loud, shrill squawks, flapping his wings frantically. His alarming cries echoed through the house, breaking the stillness of the night. Alan was the first to wake up. Disoriented, she rubbed her eyes and saw Arthur hopping wildly on his perch, screeching and pointing his beak toward the window. Alarmed, Alan ran to the window in frozen shock. Flames were visible in the distance, rapidly closing in on their neighborhood. Realizing the gravity of the situation, she rushed to wake her parents and Alex. Arthur, sensing the urgency, didn't stop. He flew from room to room, shrieking loudly to ensure everyone was awake. The family, still groggy and confused, gathered in the living room as Arthur continued his relentless effort to alert them. It was then that they smelled the smoke seeping through the walls and heard the faint crackle of fire growing louder. Their confusion quickly turned to panic as they realized their home was in imminent danger. Thanks to Arthur's quick thinking and piercing cries, the family was now aware of the life-threatening situation. The parrot's remarkable intelligence had given them precious moments to act, but as they prepared to escape, the danger intensified, and a horrifying realization struck them. They were not all accounted for. Arthur's frantic cries had successfully awakened the entire family. Alan, her parents, and Arthur gathered in the living room, their faces filled with confusion and fear. The house was engulfed in chaos as smoke seeped in through cracks, and the orange glow of the fire illuminated the walls. Outside, screams of panic echoed as neighbors tried to flee the flames that consumed everything in their path. The family quickly realized the gravity of their situation. They needed to escape before the fire reached them. The air grew thick with smoke, making it harder to breathe, and the sound of wood cracking under the heat sent chills down their spines. As Alan's father instructed everyone to head for the door, Arthur let out a piercing cry, flapping his wings and flying around in circles. He seemed distressed, as if trying to communicate something urgent. Alan suddenly stopped and looked around. "Where's Alex?" she asked, panic creeping into her voice. The realization struck them like lightning. Alex wasn't with them. Terror gripped the family. Alan's mother screamed, calling out Alex's name repeatedly, but there was no response. The fire was spreading rapidly, licking at the walls and floors. The heat was unbearable, and time was running out. Despite the overwhelming fear, they knew they couldn't leave without Alex. Frantically, they split up to search for him, checking every corner of the house. Arthur, ever alert, flew from room to room, his cries guiding them as they searched. But Alex was nowhere to be found. The thick smoke and intense heat made it harder to see, and every passing second felt like an eternity. The situation grew more dire. Flames had reached the main doors, rendering them useless. Wooden beams began to crackle overhead, threatening to collapse. The clock was ticking, and their hope of finding Alex dwindled with each passing moment. Alan's father shouted for everyone to stay calm, but fear was evident in his voice as he desperately pushed through burning debris. Amidst the chaos, Arthur's cries grew louder, as if urging them not to give up. The family, on the verge of despair, knew that they couldn't abandon Alex. The house was a death trap, and yet they were determined to save him. The fire raged on, consuming more of the house with every second. The family's search had led them to every room except one, the upstairs terrace. As they hesitated, wondering what to do next, Arthur made a sudden move, flying toward the stairs with purpose. The family was frantic, calling Alex's name amidst the chaos. The fire roared louder, consuming walls and furniture with terrifying speed. Smoke filled the air, choking them as their hope of finding Alex began to waver. Just as despair started to take hold, Arthur let out a sharp cry, his wings flapping furiously. Arthur suddenly darted toward the staircase, soaring upward through the thick, smoky air. Alan and her parents stopped in their tracks, their eyes following the bird. Arthur reached the top of the stairs and began screeching incessantly, his cries urgent and desperate. It was clear he had found something or someone. "Upstairs!" Alan yelled, grabbing her father's arm. Without hesitation, her father rushed toward the staircase, despite the flames licking at the wooden steps. Each step creaked ominously under his weight, threatening to collapse at any moment. Shielding his face with his arm, he climbed through the blazing heat, Arthur's cries guiding him forward. Reaching the terrace, Alan's father's heart sank. There, lying motionless on the ground, was Alex. His small frame was barely visible through the swirling smoke. Arthur was perched by Alex's head, frantically chirping and nudging him, trying to wake him. "Alex!" the father shouted, rushing to his unconscious son. Flames crept closer to the terrace, and the wooden railing groaned under the pressure of the heat. Time was running out. Lifting Alex into his arms, the father felt the boy's shallow breaths against his chest. He was alive, but barely. Arthur flew ahead, as if guiding them back to safety. The flames along the staircase had intensified, making the descent even more dangerous. Alan's father braced himself, leaping over the worst of the fire. Landing heavily but safely on the ground floor, he carried Alex out of the burning house, where the rest of the family waited anxiously. Placing Alex on the floor, they worked quickly to revive him. Alan fanned him while her mother brought a damp cloth to cool his face. After a tense moment, Alex coughed weakly, his eyes fluttering open. Tears of relief streamed down Alan's face as she hugged her little brother tightly. Arthur perched nearby, watching over the scene, his feathers slightly singed but his spirit undeterred. It was clear to everyone that without Arthur's sharp instincts and quick actions, Alex wouldn't have survived. But the danger was far from over. The house was collapsing, and the family now faced another harrowing challenge: escaping the inferno. As Alex regained consciousness, the family breathed a sigh of relief, but their ordeal was far from over. The flames that had been consuming their house now blocked every conceivable escape route. The once welcoming home was now a fiery trap, its walls glowing orange as the inferno intensified. Smoke billowed through every crack, making it nearly impossible to see or breathe. They rushed to the main gate, but it was engulfed in flames, the heat so intense that they couldn't get within a few feet of it. Turning toward the lounge, they found that its exit, too, had succumbed to the fire. Wooden beams cracked and fell around them, sending showers of sparks flying in every direction. The air was filled with the deafening roar of fire and the sharp pops of burning materials collapsing under their own weight. Outside, the scene was equally horrifying. The entire neighborhood was ablaze, the fire's glow illuminating the night sky with an eerie red hue. The sound of sirens pierced the air as fire trucks and ambulances raced through the streets, their horns blaring. But they were overwhelmed. Dozens of families were trapped, and emergency responders were struggling to keep up. The screams of people calling for help mixed with the sounds of shattering glass and falling debris. Alan peeked through a window and gasped. Their neighbors' houses were reduced to skeletal frames, the flames mercilessly consuming everything in their path. The smell of burning wood, plastic, and ash was suffocating. She could see firefighters battling the blaze, but the sheer scale of the fire made it seem like a losing battle. Alan's mother clutched Alex tightly, her face pale with fear. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice trembling. Alan's father wiped the sweat from his brow, his mind racing for a solution. But every door, every window, every path seemed blocked by the relentless fire. The family huddled together in the center of the room, coughing and gasping for air. Their clothes were damp with sweat and soot, and their faces streaked with ash. Arthur flew above them, his sharp cries breaking through the chaos, as if urging them not to give up. Time was slipping away. The fire was closing in, and the air was growing thinner. Their once vivid hope of survival was being suffocated by the smoke and flames. Trapped and desperate, the family could only pray for a miracle, and Arthur, their unlikely hero, was determined to find one. The fire had turned the house into a suffocating furnace. The flames devoured furniture and wooden beams, filling every corner with thick, choking smoke. The once vivid air was now a toxic mixture of carbon dioxide and ash, making it almost impossible to breathe. The family huddled together, coughing violently, their strength waning with each passing second. The smoke clung to their lungs, making every breath a painful struggle. Alan's mother held Alex tightly as she gasped for air, her face pale and streaked with soot. Alan's father leaned against a wall, his chest heaving as he tried to gather his thoughts. Alan herself was on the verge of collapse, her vision blurring as the lack of oxygen took its toll. They were all nearing unconsciousness, and time was running out. Amid the chaos, Arthur, their loyal African gray parrot, refused to give up. His sharp eyes darted around the room as he fluttered through the smoke, searching for a solution. His instincts told him that he needed to act fast. Suddenly, Arthur's gaze fell on a tall steel lamp near the window. The lamp stood just close enough to the glass that it might offer a way to ventilate the room. Without hesitation, Arthur flew toward it, his wings flapping with determination. Perching on the lamp's edge, he began pecking and pushing it with all his might. His small frame trembled with effort, but he didn't stop. With a final, forceful nudge, the steel lamp toppled over and struck the window with a loud crash. The glass shattered and fresh air rushed in, displacing the thick smoke. The toxic haze began to clear, and the family slowly started to regain their senses. As the smoke thinned, Alan's father stirred, coughing as he opened his eyes. "The window, it's broken," he muttered, realizing what had happened. Alan looked up at Arthur, who was perched near the shattered glass, his feathers slightly singed, but his spirit unshaken. Tears welled up in her eyes as she whispered, "Arthur saved us." The fresh oxygen gave the family a moment to breathe and regain their strength. But their relief was short-lived. The shattered window was still surrounded by flames, and the house remained a fiery trap. They needed to find a way out, and fast. Arthur, however, wasn't done yet. The clever parrot had already proven his worth, and he was about to guide them to their next chance at survival. As the smoke slowly began to dissipate through the shattered window, the family started regaining consciousness. Their gasping breaths grew steadier, and their minds began to clear. One by one, they opened their eyes, coughing and sputtering, as the fresh air provided a lifeline. Arthur's sharp instincts and quick thinking had saved them from certain death. Alan was the first to fully recover. Her teary eyes scanning the room, she saw Arthur perched on the broken window frame, his feathers slightly singed but his gaze determined. "Arthur, you saved us," she whispered hoarsely. Her father stirred next, sitting up with visible effort, while her mother clutched Alex, who was still weak but slowly coming to. Relief, however, was fleeting. The reality of their situation quickly set in. The shattered window that Arthur had opened was now surrounded by roaring flames. The edges of the frame were charred and melting, making it impossible to use as an escape route. Outside, the fire raged on, consuming everything in its path. The house itself was a ticking time bomb. The flames had spread to the walls and ceiling, and the heat was becoming unbearable. The family huddled together, their faces etched with fear and desperation. "We need to find a way out," Alan's father said, his voice firm but tinged with urgency. They began brainstorming escape plans, but every idea seemed doomed before it even started. The main door was completely engulfed in flames, and the staircase leading upstairs was crumbling. The garage, once a possible exit, had collapsed under the weight of the fire. Each potential route seemed blocked by walls of fire and debris. Panic set in as they realized how dire their circumstances were. Alan's mother clung to Alex, her tears mixing with soot-streaked cheeks. "What do we do? There's no way out," she said, her voice trembling. Alan clenched her fists, her mind racing. The fear in the room was palpable, weighing heavily on everyone. Amidst the tension, Arthur remained alert, his head tilting from side to side as if formulating a plan. He flew across the room, scanning for any possible escape route. His intelligence and calm demeanor seemed to inspire the family, giving them a sliver of hope. Even in this moment of despair, Arthur's presence reminded them that they weren't entirely out of options. He had saved them once and could guide them again. But time was running out, and they needed to act quickly. The family sat together in the middle of the room, their minds racing for a solution. The fire had blocked every obvious exit, and each failed plan only added to their despair. Smoke thickened around them, and the air was growing hotter by the second. Alan's father looked at his family, his face lined with determination. "We need to find a way out," he said. But the question loomed. How? As the family brainstormed, Arthur, ever alert, made his move. He flew up toward the staircase leading to the upper portion of the house. The steps were scorched, but parts of them still held strong. Arthur maneuvered through the smoke, scanning the area for anything that could serve as an escape. His sharp eyes landed on something, a steel ladder on the terrace, partially obscured by debris, but untouched by the flames. Arthur wasted no time. He swooped down the stairs and landed in front of Alan's father, squawking loudly and flapping his wings. His cries carried urgency, as if he were trying to communicate something critical. Alan stood up, recognizing Arthur's behavior. "He's trying to show us something," she said, but Alan's father hesitated. With fire surrounding them, every step was dangerous. He decided to check the lounge window instead, which led to the garage. "Let me see if this way is safer," he said, moving toward the window. The family watched anxiously as he carefully opened the lounge window. The view outside offered no hope. His car, parked in the garage, was fully engulfed in flames. Within moments, the car exploded with a deafening blast, sending fiery debris flying in every direction. Alan's father ducked just in time, narrowly avoiding the shrapnel. The explosion only intensified the fire, making it clear that the garage was no longer an option. The situation was growing more desperate, and Alan's father finally turned back to Arthur. "Show me the way," he said, his voice filled with urgency. Arthur immediately took flight, heading back up the stairs. The family followed cautiously, aware of the danger, but driven by the hope that Arthur's discovery could lead them to safety. At the top of the stairs, Arthur landed near the steel ladder and squawked again, pointing with his beak. The ladder was stable and led down to the backyard, a potential escape route, but flames still flickered dangerously close to it, making the path fraught with peril. Time was running out, and the family had to make a choice. Would they trust Arthur's instincts and brave the flames, or would they continue searching for another way? The deafening blast from the car explosion sent shockwaves through the house. Flaming debris scattered in all directions, intensifying the fire that already threatened to consume everything. The heat surged and the smoke thickened, making it nearly impossible to see. The flames roared louder, crackling as they engulfed the remaining structure. The garage route was no longer an option, and the family was left with only one choice: to trust Arthur. Alan's father turned to the parrot, his face etched with determination. "Show us the way, Arthur," he said, his voice barely audible over the chaos. Arthur, unfazed by the destruction around him, flapped his wings and soared toward the staircase he had discovered earlier. The staircase was their only chance, but it was far from safe. Flames licked at the edges of the steps, and the air was heavy with the acrid stench of burning wood. Arthur landed briefly at the base of the stairs, squawking urgently to guide them. Alan's father took charge, lifting Alex into his arms. "Stay close and move quickly," he instructed. One by one, they followed Arthur's lead, navigating the treacherous staircase. The wooden steps creaked and groaned under their weight, some partially charred and ready to give way. Alan's father carefully carried Alex up, shielding him from falling embers, while Alan held tightly to her mother's hand, helping her keep pace. The scene was nothing short of terrifying. Flames flared on either side, threatening to cut off their escape. The family could feel the heat singeing their skin, and the smoke burned their throats with every breath. Arthur, undeterred, continued to fly ahead, occasionally pausing to ensure they were following. His cries broke through the crackling of the fire, urging them onward. Alan's father reached the top first, placing Alex on the terrace before turning back to help Alan and her mother. "You're doing great. Keep going," he called out, his voice strained but encouraging. Just as the last step gave a foreboding creak, they managed to reach the top. The terrace offered a momentary reprieve, though the flames were quickly encroaching. Arthur perched near the steel ladder he had discovered earlier, squawking as if to say, "This way." The family gathered, their faces streaked with soot and sweat, their breaths coming in gasps. They were alive but far from safe. The family exchanged a glance of unspoken agreement. They had no choice but to trust Arthur's instincts once again. Their loyal parrot had brought them this far, and now he would lead them to what they hoped would be their salvation. Reaching the terrace was a small victory, but the danger was far from over. As the family stepped into the open space, the door through which they had entered suddenly caught fire, the flames spreading rapidly and blocking their way back. Thick smoke billowed from the house below, and the intense heat radiating upward made the terrace an increasingly unsafe refuge. Alan's father scanned the area desperately. Their only option was the steel ladder Arthur had discovered earlier, which led to the backyard. Though the backyard itself was not entirely safe, small pockets of fire burned in scattered patches, it offered the only viable route away from the collapsing house. Arthur perched near the ladder, flapping his wings and squawking insistently. He seemed to know there was no time to waste. "Follow me," Alan's father said firmly, lifting Alex into his arms once again. He approached the ladder cautiously, testing its stability before helping the children descend. One by one, the family began their descent. The steel rungs were searing hot, and the flames from below reached dangerously close to the ladder. Alan's father, carrying Alex, went first, shielding his son from the rising heat. Sweat poured down his face as he carefully placed his feet on each rung, gripping tightly to avoid slipping. Alan and her mother followed closely, the smoke stinging their eyes and making it hard to breathe. "Keep moving, we're almost there," Alan's father called out, his voice strained but steady. Arthur hovered above them, his cries guiding their path and urging them to stay strong. As they neared the ground, the house began to give way behind them. The roof collapsed with a deafening crash, sending sparks and debris flying through the air. The family quickened their pace, the fear of being caught in the collapse driving them forward. Finally, they reached the backyard, the cool earth beneath their feet offering a momentary sense of relief. But they couldn't stop. The backyard, though safer than the house, was still surrounded by flames. Small fires burned on the grass and fences, and the air was thick with ash. Arthur flew ahead, his keen instincts leading him toward the safest path through the chaos. The family followed closely, dodging burning debris and avoiding the larger flames. They moved quickly, their hearts pounding with adrenaline, as the house behind them was consumed entirely by the fire. With Arthur's guidance, they reached the edge of the backyard, where they paused to catch their breath. The danger wasn't over, but they had made it out of the burning house alive. Now they needed to find help. As the family stumbled into the backyard, their relief was short-lived. The flames that had engulfed their home were now spreading rapidly, encroaching on the small space where they stood. The heat was unbearable, and smoke filled the air, making it hard to breathe or think clearly. Alan's mother, already weak from exhaustion and smoke inhalation, collapsed to the ground, unconscious. "Mom!" Alan cried, rushing to her side. Her father knelt beside his wife, his face etched with despair. His hands trembled as he tried to wake her, but she remained unresponsive. "I can't carry her and protect you both at the same time," he said, his voice breaking under the weight of the situation. The children clung to each other, their eyes wide with fear as they watched the fire creep closer. Arthur, perched on a nearby fence, flapped his wings and let out sharp, urgent cries, as if to say, "We must keep moving." But Alan's father couldn't bring himself to leave his wife's side. He sat there, shielding her as the flames drew nearer. Realizing the urgency of the situation, Arthur took action. He flew down to Alan and Alex, nudging them gently as if instructing them to follow him. "What do we do?" Alex whispered, his voice shaking. Alan glanced at Arthur, her mind racing. "We have to trust him," she said, taking Alex's hand. Arthur led the children through the smoke-filled backyard, avoiding the flames with his sharp instincts. He guided them toward the road, where the faint sound of sirens offered a glimmer of hope. The children followed closely, coughing and stumbling, but determined to make it out alive. When they reached the road, they saw police cars and rescue vehicles parked nearby. Firefighters were working tirelessly to contain the blaze, their figures silhouetted against the glowing inferno. Arthur flew ahead, his piercing cries catching the attention of a rescue worker. The firefighter turned, spotting the soot-covered children and the frantic Parrot. "This way!" the rescuer called, rushing toward them. Arthur circled above, ensuring the children were noticed before returning to Alan's father and mother. The firefighter quickly brought Alan and Alex to safety, while others moved toward the backyard to assist the parents. Alan's father, cradling his unconscious wife, was overwhelmed with relief as the rescue team arrived. They carefully lifted her onto a stretcher, administering oxygen and checking her vitals. The family was finally in the hands of professionals, but the ordeal wasn't over yet. As they were rushed to the emergency vehicles, Alan looked up at Arthur, who perched nearby, his feathers streaked with soot. "You saved us," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. But her heart remained heavy, knowing her mother's condition was critical. As the rescue team worked tirelessly to control the spreading flames, Alan, Alex, and their father were rushed into the safety of an ambulance. However, the family's relief was overshadowed by the critical condition of Alan's mother. She had inhaled far too much smoke during their harrowing escape, and her body was visibly weak. On the stretcher, she coughed uncontrollably before slipping into unconsciousness. "Mom, please wake up!" Alan cried, clutching her mother's hand as tears streamed down her soot-streaked face. Alex, sitting beside her, was trembling, his small hands gripping Alan's arm tightly. "Is she going to be okay?" he whispered, his voice barely audible amidst the chaos. Their father, though trying to stay composed, could barely hold back his tears. He placed a comforting hand on Alan's shoulder, but was clearly struggling to contain his fear and heartbreak. "She'll be okay," he said, as much to convince himself as his children. Arthur perched quietly on Alan's lap, his usual energy subdued as though he understood the gravity of the situation. Every now and then he would let out a soft chirp, as if trying to console them. His presence, though small, offered a glimmer of comfort in an otherwise overwhelming moment. The ambulance raced through the streets, its siren wailing. Alan held her mother's hand tightly, silently pleading with her to wake up. "You'll be fine, Mom. You have to be," she whispered through her sobs. Alex buried his face in his sister's shoulder, unable to watch his mother's lifeless form. When they arrived at the hospital, the medical team sprang into action. Alan's mother was immediately taken into the ICU, and Alan, Alex, and their father were left in the waiting area, their hearts heavy with worry. Arthur remained close, perched on the back of a chair, watching over the family as they waited anxiously for any news. The sterile walls of the hospital seemed to close in on them, the air thick with uncertainty. Every minute felt like an eternity as they prayed for their mother's recovery. Tears flowed freely, and hope hung precariously by a thread. The ambulance had barely come to a stop at the hospital when Alan's mother was rushed into the ICU. Her fragile condition left the family clinging to hope as medical staff worked urgently to stabilize her. Meanwhile, Alan's father was treated for minor injuries, though his focus remained entirely on his wife. Alan and Alex sat in the waiting area, their eyes swollen from crying. Arthur perched on a nearby chair, watching over them silently. Occasionally, he let out soft chirps, his usual liveliness subdued, as if sensing the heavy atmosphere. Alex clutched Alan's hand tightly, his face pale and tear-streaked. "Do you think Mom will be okay?" he asked in a trembling voice. Alan tried to answer, but could only manage a weak nod, unable to hold back her tears. Minutes felt like hours as the family waited for any update. The sterile environment of the hospital, the beeping of machines in the distance, and the murmurs of nurses created an eerie backdrop to their grief. Alan's father paced the hallway, his head in his hands, whispering silent prayers. Finally, the door to the ICU opened, and a doctor stepped out, his expression grave. Alan and Alex immediately stood up, their hearts pounding in their chests. "I'm sorry," the doctor began, his voice heavy with regret. "We did everything we could, but her lungs were too damaged by the smoke. She didn't make it." The words hit like a thunderclap. Alex let out a wail of despair, burying his face in Alan's chest. Alan froze, her knees buckling, as tears streamed down her face. She couldn't comprehend the reality of her mother being gone. Their father, usually a pillar of strength, slumped into a chair, his face buried in his hands as sobs racked his body. Arthur fluttered from his perch and landed on Alan's shoulder, gently nuzzling her neck as if trying to console her. His presence, though small, was a reminder that they were not alone in their grief. The loss of their mother left a gaping void in their hearts, a pain so profound that words couldn't capture it. Yet, amidst the sorrow, Arthur remained by their side, offering comfort in the only way he knew how. After the tragic loss of their mother, Alan and Alex were plunged into a deep silence. Their once vibrant laughter and chatter were replaced by an overwhelming stillness that hung over the family like a cloud. The grief was heavy, and both children struggled to process the absence of the woman who had been their guiding light. Their father, though heartbroken, decided it was best to leave Los Angeles behind. The city, now a painful reminder of their loss in the devastating fire, no longer felt like home. He moved the family to a quieter town, hoping the change of environment would bring some solace. Initially, the transition did little to help Alan and Alex. They were withdrawn and listless, spending their days in silence. Alex refused to pick up his school books, and Alan avoided her hobbies, unable to find joy in the things she once loved. Even Arthur, their ever-loyal parrot, seemed subdued, as if sharing their grief. But their father and Arthur refused to give up on them. Their father would sit with them every evening, sharing stories of their mother, her kindness, her strength, and her love for them. These moments, though bittersweet, began to remind them of the bond they still had as a family. Arthur, with his boundless energy, slowly brought light back into their lives. One day, as Alan sat quietly at her desk, Arthur perched beside her and began mimicking a math equation, just as he used to. A small smile crept onto her face as she remembered how he'd always been her study partner. She picked up a pencil for the first time in weeks and solved the problem. It was a small step, but it was the beginning of her return to normalcy. For Alex, the breakthrough came when Arthur started imitating the sound of a soccer ball being kicked. Intrigued, Alex picked up his old ball and began practicing again. Soon he was running around the yard with Arthur playfully flying above him. His laughter echoed for the first time since the tragedy. Over time, the family began to heal. Alan resumed her studies, excelling once more, and Alex found joy in playing with his friends again. Arthur remained at the heart of their recovery, always there to offer comfort, laughter, and hope. Though their mother's absence was deeply felt, the family learned to cherish the memories they had while moving forward. Together with Arthur's unwavering presence, they found the strength to rebuild their lives.